We've got kickoff times and another Friday night game in the Big Ten for Nebraska coming up right now.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins.
All right, here we go, everybody. Welcome in. Connor Happer, 1620 The Zone here. Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Yes, it's time to get our game faces on because this is a big day in the offseason of college football. And the one of the biggest, I guess, until there's some sort of random conference realignment news in the middle of the summer or something like that.
That is on the bingo board as well.
Yeah. So we'll see if that happens later in the summer. But for right now, we have the kickoff times, or some of the kickoff times, specifically for the Big Ten Conference. Fox has announced its first 3 weeks of the season and select games throughout the season that they have chosen to pick up and release times for today. And we're going to react to it. This is basically just a straight up reaction podcast, which we don't get those very much in May around here. I'm excited.
Breaking news, and we'll get to some baseball before the show ends today. News out of the Chapel Hill Regional.
All right, so here we go. The noteworthy things that you need to know about: Nebraska will get its home opener against Akron. Welcome back, Akron. Will they boo Akron when they take the field because of what they did to the Scott Frost era in 2018? I don't know. Maybe we'll find out. But it will be an opportunity for you to have a long day of hot tailgating because it's a 6:30 kickoff on the BTN to start the home slate for Nebraska. That is, of course, coming off of the week where they play Cincinnati on Thursday night at 8 o'clock on ESPN down in Kansas City. We talked about that game yesterday. There is already over 60,000 tickets sold for that game. The next week is the Houston Christian game. So this is week 3.
That's the one we've all been waiting for.
Yeah, I can't. We've been waiting all offseason to get a Houston Christian game time announcement. September 13th, Memorial Stadium. This will be an 11 a.m. kickoff, and it'll be on FS1 that day. So that takes you through the first 3 weeks of the season. I want to talk a little bit about what potentially is coming for that Michigan game, which is the week after. We'll do that a little bit later in the podcast. But there's the biggest news, the biggest part of this drop today as it pertains to Nebraska is the Friday night game. We knew we were going to learn a Friday night game if Nebraska was going to have one. Chances are they were. We speculated that it would be the UCLA game earlier on this podcast a few weeks ago. It is not. It is Nebraska's road trip to the Twin Cities, which was originally scheduled for Saturday, October 18th, as sort of a placeholder date. It is now being moved up to Friday, October 17th, and it will be on Big Fox. So there's your Friday night game. We said yesterday, I will say this on this podcast, we did say yesterday that Minnesota loves playing on days that aren't Saturday, and they do have a couple of those opportunities this year.
Yeah, I was looking through the Gophers schedule to see how often they had played on non-Saturdays. And really in the past, I was surprised that it wasn't more. It's been primarily just those Thursday night openers, which is related to the State Fair up there in Minneapolis. Like Nebraska fell into that trap a couple years ago for Matt Rhule's debut and came away with an L. And they generally do that every year. Minnesota does. Had Ohio State up on a Thursday night a few years ago in the Twin Cities. But this is the first. This will be the first Friday night game at Huntington Bank Stadium in this new Fox Friday arrangement, which is just going into its third season. But the Gophers definitely like to get on a stage where they're not competing against 28 other games. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's good for Nebraska too. not quite the same situation as Minnesota, but it's certainly good for Nebraska, I think, and I think you think, to have an opportunity to be out there like the Huskers are going to be in week 1. Minnesota also, by the way, is a Thursday night in week 1 too. So a similar schedule for Minnesota as PJ Fleck's team goes through the season. And then as we'll discuss here in a few minutes when we talk about the other Big Ten games on Friday night, Minnesota is playing not 1, but 2 Friday night games in the Big Ten before Black Friday. They're not on Black Friday. Well, perhaps they are, but 2 before Black Friday for Minnesota here in 2025.
Yeah, so I think the first thing you look at as it pertains to Nebraska is where this takes place in the schedule. Like, is it going to be a problem moving a game, up a week? So we're moving it up to Friday, October 18th. That is coming off of it. This is sort of interesting, I think. Like, they'll be haggling about this, I think, this summer. Nebraska is coming off of a long East Coast road trip to probably one of the longest trips they get. And outside of their trip to the West Coast, obviously this year it's about the same. Obviously, people forget that Nebraska is right in the middle of the country. So they're going to Maryland the week before on October 11th. And afterwards you get Northwestern at home. So you get an extra day for that game, but you get a really what ends up being a pretty condensed week after a long trip back. And I guess we don't know what time that Maryland game is going to be yet, but let's just say that's a night game. You're not getting back till basically early Sunday morning. And then you have to re-rack it and play on the road on Friday night at Minnesota. Short trip, but you miss a day of prep, and you really miss probably about a day and a half of prep. And rest just because of what's coming off the week before it. Any issues with that?
I have a thought on it. Let me first say that the other announcement that came on Thursday is the Black Friday kickoff is back to an early time. People have come to their senses and they're not playing Black Friday in Lincoln, Nebraska, or Iowa City at night.
Wait, you didn't like it?
I did not like it. I mean,
wow.
It was good on the front end because I got to spend more time with my family on Thanksgiving, but I did not love the night kickoff on Black Friday. It was too cold, and it would also be cold at 11 a.m. No, I didn't. I didn't like sitting around on Black Friday, and I'm a traditionalist in this sense on Thanksgiving weekend. I feel like that game should be enjoyed with Thanksgiving leftovers for lunch. So it's 11 a.m. CBS, NBC were the big bad folks who took us into the Iowa City cold at night last year. This year, Purdue, Indiana, or Indiana at Purdue is the Black Friday night game on NBC. But to answer your question about the taxing nature of Nebraska playing, this is the only back-to-back weeks on the road on the entire schedule. And it's at Maryland on October 11th, as you said, and then now at Minnesota on the 17th. If it's a night game at Maryland, that's impossible to argue. That is going to be more difficult because you get back early Sunday morning. If it's an 11 Central window or the 2:30 window, no big deal. Like I came to this realization a few days ago when I was talking to some college baseball coaches about how they travel, and you compare it to how football teams travel.
Yeah.
The difference for Nebraska between going to Maryland and going to, say, Northwestern or Iowa is like an extra 60 minutes sitting on a charter plane. Like, it isn't really that big of a deal. Like they're not like busing from Maryland to Lincoln.
Hey, that was always my argument too last year.
You don't have connections to make. Like
we heard an endless line of college football coaches last year talk about the challenges of the travel and especially the new West Coast ones, and they were like, well, this is our deal with the devil, we're everywhere and stuff like that. Like, you're right. I like the kid. First of all, kids are kids, right? They're not I guess they're 18 to 22, sometimes 23 and 24 years old. They're a little bit more resilient than us old people are, where it's like, they can kind of operate off of weird sleep schedules because they're used to it, and they go where they're kind of told to go. I generally agree with you on this, by the way. I think a lot is made out of it, but taking a whole day and a half off of prep and then rest, that becomes the significant part. Like I'm more worried about the prep than I am about the rest.
So any road game presents the problem that Nebraska might face coming back from Maryland. It doesn't really matter that it's at Maryland and it's a 2 time zone jump. Like, okay, so the flight's an hour 45 or 2:15 instead of an hour 10. Like that's irrelevant. The triple time zone thing that the West Coast teams do when they go out to Penn State, or that I can buy a little bit because your clock is off, and even though the teams like try to stay on their time, no, I get it if they have an early game or a late game, but for Nebraska going to Maryland, it's a 2 time zone jump. They're generally used to that kind of thing. That's the advantage of being in the central time zone. And I don't think that like we should sit here in May and like start to, and I know this isn't what you were doing, but I don't think we should sit here in May and start to make excuses for why Nebraska didn't play well or isn't going to play well on October 17th, Friday night at Minnesota, because it had a road game the week before.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Like I generally think these Friday night games are a net positive if you look at that from a more global perspective. But I know people are going to see this and they're going to say, this is not good. The Big Ten hates us. Like it'll give those people more ammo.
Well, they do. They the Big Ten.
Right. Exactly.
Except in baseball where they cater to Nebraska.
Yeah. So let's talk about baseball here coming back. And then we have a couple other straggling schedule conversations that we have to get to as well. So plenty to come as we continue on here on the Locked On Nebraska podcast. But first, a word from our friends from the FanDuel Sportsbook. There is only one conference finals series left. The Thunder are going to the finals, disposing of the Minnesota Timberwolves yesterday, and the Knicks need one to stay alive. So if you wanted to get on the action, there's limited time to do so. Do it right now with the FanDuel Sportsbook, where you can place your first $5 bet, and you can get $200 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. So if you're in on the NBA, awesome. You can go mid-game. Live betting is fantastic. Same game parlays. You can go early championship type, long-term type of bets. You can get on that as well. But I do want to remind you that there's plenty of options that are just NBA and the FanDuel Sportsbook. NHL playoffs are going right now. The French Open is going on right now. There's NFL futures and stuff like that. Even if you're into college football, there is some individual game lines there for you as well. Once again, that first $5 bet hits and you get $200 in bonus bets. Head to FanDuel.com right now. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Welcome back on this Thursday episode of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Mitch Sherman, Connor Happer with you. Want to remind you to get your mailbag questions in for our Friday show. We will be discussing all of the things that you want us to talk about. We can talk about football schedules. We can talk about the month of June that's coming up for Nebraska, as you see the map up there on the screen on YouTube. The pins of all of our great listeners who've sent in questions. We like to update that. Actually, we don't update it at all.
Somebody just gives it to us. It's great.
Yeah. But that's coming up on Friday, and next week we may have a bit of a disjointed schedule next week, but we'll definitely get you some football content as Nebraska gets going in the month of June. All right, at least one more thing that I want to get to on the scheduled conversation. Thursday brought us announcements from the TV networks in the Big Ten on weeks 0 through 3. Kickoff times, and then we got some special dates through the season, like Nebraska Black Friday 11 a.m. kick in Lincoln on November 28th, I think, and the October 17th Minnesota Fox Friday night 7 p.m. Nebraska at the Gophers. So you'll notice if you look through the information that I'm sure is floating out there on the internet this afternoon about the kickoff times that were announced on Thursday, that Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State skate free again. No Friday night games for those programs in the Big Ten, and they've requested, or I know certainly in the case of Ohio State and Michigan, have requested not to do that, or Michigan says don't even do it on the road for us, like we're not playing Friday night. Troy Dannon kind of got into the act a little bit last year after Nebraska hosted Illinois on Friday and said, hey, we didn't like that. Not the outcome. They didn't like that either, but they didn't like the logistical thing that was going on with students on campus and staff and having to shut down campus basically on a Friday. So Huskers are okay with a road game on Friday as they're getting this year, not really at home. What do you think about Friday night games in general and what they do for the Nebraska program?
Well, I mean, I think it's something different. And I don't mind them personally, but that's the way that I, the way that I intake my football is it's kind of anytime, any place, anywhere, that type of thing. Like, I understand that Nebraska views itself as a program that doesn't necessarily, and the numbers back this up for the record. Like, Nebraska views itself as a program that's just like Ohio State and Michigan from the perspective of, we don't need to play these weird games in weird TV windows to get viewers, to get eyes on our games. We're already a big brand, and the numbers back that up. There's truth to that. But I do think there's, in the era now that we're in, where the Big Ten is 18 teams and you have so much inventory, the Fox, the Big Ten's owner, basically, is they got to put games on Friday nights, and they got to move some things around a little bit. So, like, I'm supportive of it. I liked the Illinois game at home last year. I don't think it needs to be an every year thing, but I thought it was different and fun, and I thought people embraced it. I like night games at Memorial Stadium in general, and I think anytime you get those opportunities, you take them. I understand the logistical challenges, but I don't have to worry about those because I'm not Troy Dannon. So, like, I get why Dannon doesn't like it. But as a fan, I thought it was pretty cool.
Here's the number that I think matters to the Big Ten. It matters certainly to Fox. And this is why Nebraska's back on Friday night in week 8. 4.2 million. Those are the viewers.
Yep.
That's the number of viewers that Nebraska, Illinois drew last year. And honestly, in the place that Matt Rhule is trying to take Nebraska football, where Nebraska's at now, where Nebraska expects to get, it's important to play these kind of games. It's important to play on a Thursday night against Cincinnati in an NFL stadium to open the season when you're the biggest game of the night. It's important to go back in the middle of the season in October and say, hey, here's Nebraska. Like, remember Nebraska. Nebraska's on the stage. It's important for recruiting. It's important for exposure, for fundraising, all of the things that Nebraska, Dannon in particular, in Rhule on more of a small, a macro level, is trying to build with this program. I think it's important for the quarterback. It's important for Dylan Raiola to be out there. Like, he is on a mission to do things for Nebraska that go beyond, throwing for X number of yards. Dylan's trying to help because of the entire history of his family in the state of Nebraska. Like, Dylan Raiola is not at Nebraska if he doesn't have bigger aspirations for this program than just becoming an all Big Ten quarterback. Like, he's here to finish the job that his dad started a generation ago and get Nebraska back to a place where it's relevant in college football. And one way for him to do that is to go out and throw for 300 yards at Arrowhead Stadium and 4 touchdowns at Minnesota in week 8 on a Friday night. So playing on a big stage can only help. Well, it can only help him and help Nebraska as long as the Huskers win those games.
Right. You gotta take care of business. I also think Nebraska is, just from a more global standpoint, they're in this, just, as I sort of talked about, all these teams in the Big Ten, like Ohio State and Michigan, they're too good for it. Penn State's going to play for try and play for a national championship and all these things. Like, Nebraska's in this weird sort of range in the hierarchy of the Big Ten where they're a traditional brand and a traditional, helmet that's recognizable. So people are going to automatically watch them. There's alums all across the country and people who have just rooted for Husker football throughout their entire lives because they were so in your face in the 90s. And they're also not that good right now, in general. So they don't really have that much weight to throw around with the Big Ten to be like, hey, we can't do this because we're Nebraska. Like, Ohio State kind of has that clout at the moment. So Fox knows that if they put them on Friday night, it's going to pop a number. It was their best Friday night game all year. And that Friday night thing replaced for Fox like Friday Night SmackDown or something like that. It's doing triple, quadruple, a million times that. So I think Fox likes Nebraska in that position. Like, Nebraska should bite back and say, hey, look, man, we can't do this all the time. Once a year on the road, great. Once every 3-4 years at home, fine. We don't need to be doing this all the time, but I understand, where you also have to understand where you sit in the hierarchy of things and where you're going to get placed on Saturdays too.
One thing that college football on Friday nights does not preempt is the Major League Baseball playoffs. Last year, Fox tried the doubleheader with the Yankees-Dodgers series, which was just luck, by the way, that they had Yankees-Dodgers before Rutgers-USC. But that was the late kickoff on the East Coast, and they're not going back to that. So no Fox Friday Night Football on October 24th or 31st because of the Major League Baseball postseason. What you will get, in addition to Nebraska, Minnesota, is Iowa at Rutgers on September 19th, Northwestern at USC on November 7th. That's the date that many were predicting Nebraska would play UCLA, the other team in LA. Minnesota at Oregon, Gophers back on Friday night on November 14th, and then Washington, UCLA, the traditional Big Ten clash on November 21st. As I mentioned, Indiana Purdue is the Black Friday night game. And then there are 3 Big 12 games on Friday night, plus Auburn Baylor in week 1 on August 29th.
There you go. There's your Friday nights. But we still have another. It's amazing that we could take this one little thing and we could stretch it out. But we still do have a couple thoughts on maybe what's left, what wasn't announced today for Nebraska in terms of the schedule. So we'll do that. And then we, of course, have to touch on baseball as well, as maybe they can say that they've been disrespected by the SEC. We'll be back after this. All right, welcome back. Connor Happer, Mitch Sherman with you. One more call to get in your mailbag questions in on a Friday. We will do that show tomorrow. So week 4, we're going to zoom in on this. Nebraska doesn't have an official game timer network for this. This is the game against Michigan. They have game times for each of their first 3 games, the Minnesota game and the Iowa game, as we've talked about throughout this podcast. But the Michigan game is Nebraska's biggest home game of the season, and we'll hear about this at some point, this summer. It won't be one of those flex things. This will be an interesting thing to see how this one shapes up for Nebraska. So we looked around at week 4 and what Fox could potentially take, and you look at the Big Ten, and you see Oregon State at Oregon. That's going to be a Big Ten property this year. You have Illinois and Indiana. You have Iowa and Rutgers. You have
that's the Friday night,
which is going to already on Friday night. You have Maryland and Wisconsin. You have Michigan State at USC, and you have Notre Dame will be on NBC against Purdue that week. And then you think about, okay, that's not particularly exciting. What else could there be for Fox?
Right. Well, so I think the thought there is like, okay, is Michigan Nebraska going to be big noon kickoff? And in most scenarios, you would probably say yes. In this scenario,
however,
I'm thinking no for one reason.
Would you like to tell? Would you? Okay, I'll tell people. There happens to be a game in the Big 12 that week that will be a Big 12 home game for the Fox property. A Fox property. That is a game for the UCF Golden Knights at home. They just happened to host on September 20th Chapel Bill's North Carolina Tar Heels, assuming that Chapel Bill is still the coach of North Carolina at that point.
True.
We'll have to get some assurances before they announce that. But I would
take the luster away if he's not.
My guess, and I think our collective guess for this podcast is that UCF playing host to North Carolina will be the big noon game, allowing the Nebraska-Michigan game to either be on CBS in the mid-afternoon or NBC at night, depending on who has the second pick that week, which is extremely exciting, I think, for Nebraska fans.
I don't know how the Big 12 draft works for games. If Fox wants that and wants to put it on Big Noon, I would think that its priority, it would get priority. The Big 12 is not like the Big 10 because the Big 12 has a contract with ESPN and Fox.
Right.
So is it possible that that Chapel Bill against Scott Frost is going to end up on an ESPN network?
It just depends on who has the pick in the week, which we don't know. I would love to, we'll get the whole breakdown afterwards from Michael Mulvihill.
Considering that this is Fox's only shot in the regular season,
right,
at Bill Belichick, I would think that it would do whatever is needed to maneuver the schedule so that it gets the pick that week, but we don't know the inner workings of it. So it's just kind of something that's out there, something to think about. If you're looking at the Big 10 schedule and you think, all right, Michigan at Nebraska, Big Noon, it's an easy pick because it's the best game in the Big 10 that week. Well, not so fast. You might not be eating Valentinos at noon and watching Gus Johnson with Nebraska, Michigan. It could be what will that be like? Bill Belichick and Scott Frost. Did they have any? Are they friends? Like, didn't Scott play for Bill at one point in his NFL career?
There's got to be a connection there. I would think that they have crossed paths at some point, but now they do so in a potential Big Noon game. I think if you're a Nebraska fan, you're like really rooting for. I am like I don't want to play that Michigan game at 11 o'clock in the morning.
Sure. You'd like to see it at night.
Yeah. I want that to be just like the Colorado game from last year. I want it to be NBC. Mm-hmm. I don't care who the broadcasters are. I think NBC's production is great. I think their broadcasters, especially in the early part of the season, are, a little bit more questionable, but I don't care about that. I want it to be the best possible environment. And so I think if you're a Nebraska fan, you're rooting for this heavily as we go on throughout the next couple weeks here.
Yeah, it could be 3 of the first 4 at night for Nebraska. So that's one more item that still has a bit of suspense left in it. So as we promised, some baseball talk to finish the show today. Nebraska plays tomorrow in the aforementioned Chapel Bill Regional. Oklahoma, interesting here, has opted to hold its ace, Kyson Witherspoon. We spent some time on the pod this week talking about Kyson Witherspoon. He's the projected first-round pick, all SEC pitcher. They're going to gamble a bit and plan to use him in game 2, presumably against the host North Carolina, which is going to get by Holy Cross, I've got to think.
Yes.
Oklahoma would have to get by Nebraska, and on the mound for the Sooners will be Malachi Witherspoon. This is Kyson Witherspoon's twin brother. Their statistics do not mirror each other. Malachi Witherspoon is 3-8 with a 5.53 ERA. So I dug in just a bit into who he is. So they're very similar.
Yeah.
Malachi throws mid to upper 90s, just like Kyson, but Kyson has put it together much better against SEC hitters than his twin brother. Malachi has some issues with repeating his delivery, according to baseball analysts. He was actually a higher ranked prospect out of high school, but it just hasn't worked as well for him at this level. Inconsistency is the big thing with Malachi, not talent. He's going to be a draft pick, perhaps not a first rounder like Kyson, the ace, but he turned down an offer out of high school, 12th round pick of the Diamondbacks to go pitch in junior college, and then they transferred together to OU a couple years ago. So Nebraska's still going to face a big-time arm tomorrow at 4 p.m. ESPN Plus in the regional opener. But thoughts on OU holding its ace? Huskers, by the way, are going with lefty senior Jackson Brockett, who's 4-0 with a 1.93 ERA in his past 6 starts.
I don't think you have to necessarily look at it that way. But if you want to be if you want to have a chip on your shoulder as a fan going into this game, this certainly gives you the ammunition to do so. I'll say this, these teams, they're trying to play. You are thinking a little bit about the second game, obviously, and how you match up with the next team, but you're also looking at the matchup. So it's probably deeper than in the stats, like it's in the profile of actually what they're going to give you. I mean, so Malachi Witherspoon, while his brother Kyson has more, absurd numbers at this point. Malachi has struck out 82 on the year, which would be the highest on Nebraska's staff by more than 10.
Oh yeah, he's got an electric arm.
He's coming off of a start against Texas a couple weeks ago, which he struck out 10. That's that is extreme for a team who's number 1, number 2, number 3 in the country. And he also had a double-digit strikeout effort against Vanderbilt, who's the number 1 overall seed in this tournament. He had 11 against them in mid-April.
Okay.
So
that's probably all you need to know.
I think he's got some real swing and miss stuff, and I think Oklahoma's looking at it and they're saying, well, Nebraska's got some swing and miss in their lineup. So I think we could probably get through this and then, shoot our best bullet for the North Carolina game. But I think if you're Nebraska and you're inside that locker room, you're thinking, hey man, like
opportunity.
What's up with this? Like we got a chance. So you could take it any way you want.
Yeah, more than disrespect, I think it's opportunity because he may come out and walk 6 in the first 2 innings and spot you a 3-0 lead. Like that's way more likely to happen with Malachi Witherspoon than it is with Kyson Witherspoon. So, by the way, you mentioned Texas. Did you see that Texas is having some problems with its stadium ahead of the regional this weekend in Austin?
No, I missed this.
The batter's eye fell over, like the batter's eye and the center field seating. It fell onto the field. So
that is not good.
Some wind, I think, came through Austin, and they got problems there. Not sure how that's going to go. I'm sure Texas can spend all the money in the world and fix it in like 12 hours, but interesting for sure. Something to keep an eye on if you're really into college baseball regionals this weekend, which I know you are because you're coming to us live right now from Fayetteville, Arkansas, in the site of the Fayetteville Regional, where Creighton and Kansas and Arkansas. And who's the 4th team are playing?
North Dakota State.
Oh yeah, the Bison.
Yeah.
How can I forget? Beat Oral Roberts to take the Summit League auto bid. Yeah, that's an interesting storyline. So what I was going to say, the thing with Oklahoma, and the thing you have to remember, Oklahoma is not in this tournament to win one game. Oklahoma played for the national championship, lost in the CWS finals against Ole Miss in 2022.
Yep.
So they are in this thing to win a bunch of games, to win this regional, to win a super regional, to get back to Omaha. And if you split your first 2 games, whether it's winning the first, losing the second, or vice versa, you're in the same spot on Saturday night or Saturday afternoon. But psychologically, you cannot go 2-0 without winning your opener, which is why a lot of teams shy away from this kind of pitching off strategy because they just say, hey, we to go 2-0, you've got to go 1-0. So we're sending our ace out there. We're not taking anything for granted.
Yeah, and if I remember right, Cash, and there'd be no way for me to find this in a quick fashion, but that year they went to the final. Cade Horton was their ace, current Chicago Cubs pitcher Cade Horton. And if I remember right, there was something in the College World Series where they kind of held him a little bit as well, and then he obviously started a game against Ole Miss in the 3-game final there. So I think they've erred on the side of caution with pitchers and when to fire their bullets as far as, when to use them.
Yeah. Skip Johnson is a responsible coach. Yep. He's not somebody who's going to throw a pitcher out there on 3 days rest and use him for 120 pitches. Like he has a pitching background. And so I think he's more confident than maybe your average head coach in being able to get a big performance. He has a good feel for what his pitchers are going to give him. So, the Sooners know what they're doing. They've had recent success, much more recent success than Nebraska in the postseason. So this is but it adds a level of intrigue for sure to what's going on with the Huskers in the opening game. If they can win, then they're in, obviously they're in good shape. The shape they want to be in going to,
And then all of a sudden you get a chance to throw a really, really hot arm at a really, really good team. Ty Horn would obviously go against North Carolina, and he'd go against Jake. I would imagine that North Carolina is throwing off against Holy Cross. They're going to go with Jake Knapp in the second game. So you give yourself the best opportunity to do the same thing. Okay.
Probably even more so when the heels see what OU's doing.
We can have more baseball talk tomorrow, but that's up to you. The questions are coming from you all on the mailbag tomorrow. That's it for us today. A reminder before we let you go that Locked On has launched the first ever national 24/7 sports streaming channel on YouTube, and it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today here for you, covering 24/7 the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app.